Hello YouTube, it's time for some more mixing tricks on the never-ending topic of compression. If you're watching this video, you probably have heard of compression many times. Everyone keeps telling you, compress this, compress that, compress every now and then. But should you always try to compress everything? Certainly not. Believe me, this will just end up in a complete disaster, which might turn out to be loud in the end, but certainly not musical. So, today I would like to demonstrate my approach to the compression across the different parts of the mix. Which tracks should be compressed, which should not, and how strong to set up the compressor. As an example, let's deconstruct my latest single, The Realm Never Dreamed, coming out this week thanks to Technomite Music. So, what to compress? My answer is the parts that are repeatable and predictable, such as bass and drums. The thing is, once you hear them, they keep looping over and over, and everyone knows what's gonna happen next, just another loop. So, we can compress them to hide them in the background and leave space for more interesting parts of the mix. For instance, let's try this low bass. Well, this is very static sound, but I already enabled the sidechain. Let's disable it. Perfectly static bass, literally nothing happens here. So there is no point to add any dynamics to it. Let's just make this sound sit in the background under everything else. But then upper basses have a little more variety and carry more information, so they could get a little less compression than the sub bass. Let's hear that. Compare with low bass. So that's definitely more dynamic, but that comes more for a trance gate than just compression. Anyway, still, the bass line as a whole is quite compressed. The idea is it should sit in the mix in the background and do not interfere with other interesting elements such as melodies. This might seem counterintuitive, but drums can get same treatment. If they just keep going with the same velocity in a long period of time, they do not draw attention to themselves, like this 4/4 loop. Alright, everyone know how it goes. But then, if you add some interesting drum loops played by hand, or just play with velocities, the drums suddenly start to stand out and work alongside the melodies, such as these drum loops from Damage, my favorites. So, they are more complex, more interesting, and thus get much less compression. As a matter of fact, I rarely compress the drum loops from Damage, and more likely even improve their dynamics in a variety of ways. More on that in other videos. The whole point of compressing repeatable parts is to separate them from more interesting parts such as melodies. A very dynamic bass line will draw attention to itself and ruin your arrangement fighting with the melody. On the other hand, if you compress the hell out of it and make it very static, it hides in the background and lets the melody live on top of it. Let me demonstrate that. Here's the full loop. Now, if I separate this, can you hear the low bass sitting in the background? In a full mix, no one pays attention to that, and we should keep this that way. On the other hand, the melody itself is very dynamic and stands out. This is the first thing you hear when this loop comes in, the melody. So once again, let's hear the big contrast between dynamics of the melody and dynamics of the bass. It's full and compressed and very static, and the level of the bass doesn't change. On the other hand, the melody gets a lot of short notes all over the place, which again get all the listeners' attention. I hope at this point you understand what I meant. Now, what to not compress, or better yet, expand the dynamics? Well, the melody, the leads, pianos, accompaniment, one-shots, and sudden effects. Everything that does not play a fixed 4/4 loop. For instance, this epic breakdown. Let's hear that. As far as I know, it doesn't contain any compressed parts. I remember now, there is one low synth that actually was compressed. Let's hear that again, solo. Well, it serves same purpose as the bass in a full mix, but I bet alongside the melody you didn't spot it at all. And that was the point. Now, think about the effects. These are often the most unpredictable parts of the mix, coming out of nowhere. So they also have high dynamics, for that reason, often underlined by some square fall or short note with a fast delay. But on the other hand, we have some risers, which are very predictable and everyone knows when it's going. They just rise until they explode or they finish. So sounds like that have fixed level and no dynamics at all. And that's their purpose. We need to have some contrast here. Of course, you can also be somewhere in the middle ground, so it's the case with electro house basses or dubstep breaks. These usually have very fixed level set up by some strong compressor, but instead they get a very complex and fast modulation at the sound design level. So they get their dynamics this way. This is some very different approach, but the overall concept is quite the same. Another note is that compression often takes place in the low or high frequencies, but not the middle range, because that's where the action takes place. All the melodies, pads, textures, effects, vocals all sit in the mid-range. And you want to make them stand out, especially effects and textures often involve some complex sound design, so do not squash them with excessive compression. In fact, you can try to expand pads and textures, and more on that in another video. But for now, just keep your mids safe from compression and add as much movement as possible in that range. And of course, you shouldn't compress live instruments, especially the ones from sample-based libraries like that. These were already recorded by skilled musicians and pre-processed, so they sound fine and natural. There is no need to compress that even further. Okay, that was it when it comes to compressing different tracks in the mix. If you found this video useful, just hit like and subscribe the channel.